through July 4. So we can kind of potentially have there is the potential to make a mistake on the front end and the back end. On the back end, people like to stop at July 5 instead of July 4. And then on the front end is whether or not we include that March 15th. So we are not including the 15th for a day of refund because the seller was responsible for that day. We start from the 16th to July 4th. When you do your number of days, I would physically count them out. And I put them in groups of 7. That way I can keep up with where I am at. It may take an extra minute to do that, but if you get off one day, it's gonna mess up the whole problem. So, March, in and of itself, 7 is 14, plus 2 is 16. April has 30. May has 31. June has 30. July, we said, was the 4. So by the time that I add them all up, my 16, my 30, my 31, my 30 over here, and the 4 there, you should come out to a total of 111 days. Any questions on the number of days before we go any further? Okay, get your beginning to ending point, know where to start, when to stop. Anniversary date's the day before, and then we start the day after. Make sure you know how many days are in each month. March has 31, of course. April is 30. 2 ways to remember that. One is the knuckles trick. The knuckles have the higher number of days, so January has 31. We dip at February at 28. March goes back to 31. We dip at April, May, dip at June. July is up. Stay there for August. Dip at September. October's up. November's down. December's up. So there's also a little rhyme, something about 30 days has September, November, and
April, June,
yes.
and December, all the rest are 31, except the second month alone, to which we 28 is not until Lee Creek is at 29.
there you go. So I do not have that memorized, but it's a great little jingle.
I never learned that, I learned
the song. So either of those work for you. A note on March, whatever your day of close is that month, I would not try to do the subtraction of 31 days minus 15.
It never works.
Although in that case you do get to 16. In the situations where you're not counting those days for different reasons, you may come off a day. So to me, I just wrote it out. That way I knew for sure I had the right number of days. I didn't want to leave it to chance. So you do 111 days as far as your number of days. For the money portion, you have 600 divided by 365. Giving you a daily rate of 1.6438. So 2 things. 1, taxes and insurance are always 365. The only one that's not going to be 365 is the one when you were dealing with interest and loans. That one has 360. The way that I remember that is a loan has an O in it and 360 has a 0 in it. So those 2 go together. Taxes and insurance are going to have 365. The only exception to that is going to be one of the FHA questions, but in those they will tell you if they want you to use 360 versus 365, if they want you to do something different. Otherwise, the presumption is it's 365 for taxes and insurance. Second thing, keep your decimal out 4 places, is what they recommend. So unfortunately, if we start rounding too much in the problem, you may end up in between 2 answers. So they do recommend keeping it at 4 places. So 1.6438. Once I apply that then to my number of days, I get for the money 182.46. And then once you get to the 182.46, at that point you have to know what side it's on in terms of is it a credit or is it a debit. So the way that I remember that is an acronym that you have seller's debit on the left, seller's credit over here on the right. So if it helps, make something like South Dakota, South Carolina. Okay, so on the left side, meaning that we wouldn't have already paid whatever it was, then they have to pay, they owe. On this side, they've already paid and they're due a refund. So it's a seller's credit. I would learn it in terms of one, either the seller or the buyer. And then if your answer's not there, you can always turn it around. So if it's a seller credit as it is for us, it would be a buyer debit if that's how it's presented to you. So rather than learning all four kind of abbreviations, learn the two, South Dakota, South Carolina, since we're so close to South Carolina, that it kind of fits for us. So seller debit if something hasn't been paid for yet, and then seller's credit if we have already paid for it. So that takes us to answer choice A, based on that. So credit to the seller in the amount of $182.46. There's a lot in that question. They can ask you a question, it's just number of days. They can ask you a question, what's just your daily rate? They can ask you just what the amount is. Or they can make it a full-on, full-fledged question, so I threw everything in there, and that way we took care of about 4 different questions in there. Is understanding also about the seller credit. Questions on that one?
Does the heat in this room have anything to do with any of this?
It's all, it's
Turn
all
it out.
because apparently everybody was cold and so now we're flipped over to the other, but it's off.
Bad time of year.
But that's what my
I
question.
mean, actually, yeah,
But
but
it's hard to get it right. this time
It
of year.
is, when it's perfect and the kids are like, no, you cannot touch it because it'll go the opposite direction. That is too hard to get breaks out. Alright, our net income and gross income problem in number 2. Anytime you see the word gross income, words, plural there, gross income, expenses, annual, net, any of those things are red flags that you're going to see or you're going to need the others. So gross, annual, expenses, net, anything along those lines. Gross, annual, expenses, net. Okay, and then the half year is gonna go with what we need to do with the 2 up here. So the key on these is once you see gross income, look for expenses, look for net income. If you see net, you need to look for gross and expenses and vice versa. So the premise is that we have a gross income on top, we pull off whatever our expenses are, and we get to our net income. Also with these questions, I like to put them in different measurements, so to speak. So as you pointed out, the one is in a half year term, but then they give you expenses on an annual basis. So just like when we measure things with inches and feet, it all has to be in the same basis or we get the wrong answer. So if we convert it all over to the annual basis, because typically that's what they're going to do anyway. So converting it over to the annual basis, our annual amount of income is $600,000. From here, our expenses represent 38% of that. When I multiply that, I get $228,000 in the dollar amount of expenses. So 2 things. One, the 38%, I converted into a decimal, but that's entirely up to you. So the decimal in 38% is behind the 8. Percent literally means per 100. Even the percent sign, which I thought was really cool when somebody showed this to me, is actually 100. Just one of the zeros is written over on the other side. So that's the whole, where they come up with the percent sign. So per 100, so divide per by 100 is 0.38. So when I multiply with 0.38. The first zero is irrelevant, you just need a decimal. Then you get the 228. Second thing, if you don't like the decimal because you don't want to move it, you can use 38 in percent. Just be aware most calculators, as soon as you hit the percent sign, it's going to take you to the answer directly. You don't then have to hit equals, like 90% of calculators. So if you do then go hit equals, because we're just ingrained to then hit equals, it changes your number into some weird number, and if you're not paying attention by the time you get done, you'll be utterly lost as to where you were at. So you can use the percent sign, just make sure you're careful with the equal sign with it. And then the next thing is, notice this is one of your answer choices, but that wasn't the answer to the question they asked you. The question they asked you is, what's the net income? That's the amount of expenses. So we need to pull out, from the 600,000, we need to pull out the 228. And I pull out the 228, I get 372, which is answer choice D. So from our annual income, we pull out our annual expenses and we get down to net income. Now this problem is a primary example. There are multiple ways to work some of these problems, and I'm not saying my way is the best way, but if we can just kind of stick with the way that I explained it, because there is, like I said, an alternative way of doing this, And if you want to know if what you did was fine, then we can do that afterwards. Just so I hate to, I see the kids in my class, they'll get it and then somebody will say something and I'm just like, no. And so then they get confused. So again, doesn't mean my way was the best way. It's just the way that maybe some of them got it. And so if you did something different and it worked out, then we can talk about that when we get all done. Questions on 2?
How did you get 2?
Oh, good question. That's where your half came in. So since it was every half year,
Oh,
and we have 2 halves in a year,
oh, yeah.
and so we need to get back to that whole year.
Okay.
Good question. Pay attention to the ones that are something like every 4 months, then you have to multiply it by 3. But the ones that are every 3 months, you gotta multiply by 4. And they like to do those because you see the one and you automatically think, oh, 3 and 3 and 4 and 4. It's not. It was every 4 months you multiply by 3. Because we have 3 4-month periods versus 4 3-month periods. So whatever it takes to get it back to a year. Questions on 2? Alright, 3, you're calculating your hazard insurance, which is just your homeowner's insurance, and the taxes. We're gonna do them individually, and then you add them back together. So it's almost kind of like the fraction problem we did with the rectangular surveys. We're gonna figure out the monthly cost to each one, multiply by the appropriate number of months, and then add our 2 numbers back together. So on the tax bill, we were at $17.76. We're gonna divide by 12. So dividing by 12 is kind of one of those inherent understood parts of the problem because we were paying them on a monthly basis. And so that's why we're supposed to know to divide by 12. And I say that lovingly because I was the kid that if I got something wrong, okay, I got it wrong. What was I supposed to know in order to figure that out correctly? So this is those underlying things we're supposed to know to divide by 12 here. That gives you 148 per month. They want to escrow 10 months. So when I multiply our total tax is the $14.80. Separately, you have the insurance of $696 divided by 12 gives you 58 per month. They want to escrow 2 months, so that's 116 in total insurance. Take your 116 and your 1480 and put them back together, and you get a total of 1596, which is B. The good news is with these proration questions in terms of the taxes, the chart that you probably have somewhere along with the calendar where it tells you so many months or so many, they can ask you so many months based on the closing date. It was in your book, that's it, you have it back there. You don't need that little bar part at all.
Okay.
Because anytime you get a question like that, they're gonna tell you exactly how many they want you to escrow. So there was that rule of thumb in the book about adding 2 months or adding whatever. Don't do any of that stuff, don't even use that chart.
Okay.
It's just straight up in the problem what they want you to do.
Okay.
Okay, so get your monthly cost and then multiply it by the appropriate number of months that they want to escrow. Questions on 3?
Okay.
Is everybody 3 for 3 right now?
So far, so good.
Alright, for any of the PMI or MIP questions are gonna follow the same plan. You're gonna start out with whatever your sales price was, multiply by the loan to value. From there, we apply the rate that they have given to us. And then either we're done, because they just wanted the amount that had to be paid at closing, or you might have to divide by 12 if they want a monthly cost. So whether we're doing PMI or MIP, that process is gonna be the same. So we're gonna start with 254. We're multiplying by the loan to value is 95%. Again, I'm gonna use 0.95. You can use 95% if you choose. That's gonna give me 241,300 as the loan amount. From here, I have to apply my rate. They have quoted a 0.0048. Again, it's 0.48%. So it's 1, 2 places and fill in the zeros. 0 ahead of the decimal is irrelevant, but you do need the 2 gap zeros. So again, if you don't like that, that's completely okay. You can use 0.48%. Just one, pay attention to that decimal, and two, make sure you use the percent sign, and then don't hit equals. Once you apply that, it is 1158.24 in your annual, and we're doing PMI on this one. So because they go on to ask you for monthly, that's our clue to divide by 12. And that works out to 96.52, which is choice C. But again, whether it's PMI, MIP, we're following that same process straight through. Multiply by your loan to value, multiply by your rate, divide by 12 if you need to get down to a monthly. Questions on 4? Alright, for 5, it's a tax proration question. So for taxes, I always think about jumping jacks, and so you can laugh at me if you want to. But when you do jumping jacks, your hands come together in the middle, but they never do what?
Touch.
Well, I might touch, but they don't cross. Okay, and what I'm trying to show you is that means if I'm July 1st in the middle, when in book world taxes get paid, or they may even take that out of the question and just say taxes are paid, which is all you really need to know. People tend to want to count from whatever that paid date is. We don't want to do that. You don't want to count across July 1st. If you find yourself in any one of these problems, numerically counting across July 1, you're doing it wrong. We only want to count to the ends, whether that be towards December 31st, if we have a fall closing date, or if it's back to the beginning of January, if we have an early spring closing date, or winter closing date on the front end. So, we're only counting to the ends.
Happy priority.
You're fine, come on, baby.
Sorry about that.
This is for you.
So we look at July 1 as our date taxes are paid. Our closing was November 6th. So based on what I was talking about, we need to go out to the end. It was after taxes were paid. And again, even if they don't give you that date, because some of the problems don't even give you the date anymore, it's either they were paid or they weren't paid. If they were paid, we're calculating a refund. Okay, just back to remember our seller debit and our seller credit, same idea. Insurance is always prepaid. In this case, because taxes were prepaid in our problem, it will still be a refund or a credit back to that. Now, same thing like it was before, we're calculating the amount of refund, so I don't count November 6th. They were responsible for that day as the seller. So I'm gonna start counting November 7 through December 31. Same principle that we did with insurance, and went up to the end of the policy date. Work here for taxes, our policy date, so to speak, is December 31. For November, it's a lot of writing, and again, do whatever makes the most sense to you, but I like to write them out so I can see exactly what's happening. So if I write them out, starting at the 7th, I have 7 times 3 is 21, 22, 23, 24. So in November, I have 24 days that I have to account for from the 7th on. In December, I have 31. If I add them back together, I have to refund them 55 days. As far as the money portion of it, it was $16.92. Again, taxes and insurance, $365. So when I work out my daily rates, I get $4 and 0.6356, kept out in 4 places. That multiplied by 55 gives me $254.96. And here again, we get to the math part, but then unfortunately it's not good enough. It's kinda like some of those questions, was the answer A for this reason or A for that reason? So, the money portion was 254.96, and we'll talk about the rest in a minute. So, again, start by figuring out your days, big jumping jacks. I did not go across the middle of my timeline, it's to the end. Had I had an early closing date, I would've went back this way. Write out the number of days, at least that's what I do for November. Get 24 when you count them all up. December was 31 to get my total at 55. From there, I can address the money. My daily rate is 4.6356, coming from using 365. And then multiplying it again to my 55, I get 254.96. Same rule applies as we talked about before. Seller debit on that end, seller credit on this end. So again, because we had already paid them, it's going to be C. They're getting that property tax credit of the 254.96.
So they pay in July for the months preceding July?
Correct.
See, that's what confused me.
That's
And
what
it
got
is.
me.
So when they pay in Book World on July 1st, they're paying 6 months in arrears
Okay.
and 6 months ahead at the same
We're
time.
just supposed to know that.
You're just supposed to know that, yeah. But I think some of the actually, like the newer additions to the books, I think have even taken out July 1st in some of their problems. They're just now saying they were either paid or not paid, and they're not even giving you the closing date or the.
I just think of
date.
November, you know,
That's right.
that's what.
If it's
it-
end
real
of
life
year,
to you.
Yeah, and for like, most of our local counties around here, we're towards the end of the year. And so if we're closing at the end of the year, depending on if we paid that bill or not, is going to determine if we get that refund or not. So the key comes down to is were they paid or they not paid? If they've already paid, it's a refund and we're on the back end of the year. If they have not been paid, then we're on the front end of the year.
Oh, okay.
Cause I've never seen them give you any weird examples like where they were paid in March and then the closing was in April. You know, so I've never had it that big of a span. They're always typically the latter part of the year or the early part of the year. So we count out that way.
So anytime there's a tax question, it's just covering January first
Correct.
to December.
December 31, you got it. Yep. And again, regardless of whenever that pay date is, you don't use that in the calculation at all. That's only to let you know, is it a refund? Which means I start counting the day after, or have they not been paid? And in that case, I have to count this portion of the year. Let's say that it's February, we're at March, 12th today? Let's say the taxes have not been paid. Well, now we have to account for all of January, all of February, and up through and including March 12th. So I say backwards, you're going back to the beginning of the year, but you don't really have to count backwards, of course, but it's that portion of the year that we're looking at. And then that will be a situation where you would include the 12th, because you're calculating how much they owe, and they haven't paid for anything, and they were responsible for that time. Other questions on that one?
Y'all square on that now?
Mhm.
Yes? Okay.
Alright, 6, this is the only type of question, shouldn't say only, sort of only. In the practice problems that are in chapter 20, which they are not comprehensive, and this is why we focus our time on this, because we try to make this as comprehensive as we possibly could for you. So that's why we kind of steer towards this and away from the book problems, although they're great practice. But with that being said, even in the book problems that were practiced in the back, they gave you one on gross rent multiplier, which was never addressed in chapter 20. Gross rent multiplier is addressed back in the value chapter. And the idea behind that is most of our income producing properties, on their sheet, they're going to tell you what they're getting per month for the property, on their listing sheet. So if the property is worth $100,000 or the person's asking $100,000, and we're getting $10,000 a month in rent, okay, we have a big complex, there's a factor of 10 in there, meaning that the property owner thinks their property is worth 10 times what their rent is. 100,000 divided by 10,000 is 10. Okay, it's a rough factor. I can drive down the street, grab another sheet from somebody else's box. They're getting $2,000 or they're getting $20,000 a month in rent. So if my factor is 10, I can apply that. Their property roughly is worth $200,000. Okay, so it's the relationship between the value of the property and the monthly income, and then using that factor, driving down and applying it to another property. You can do it based on the monthly number, in terms of the monthly income. You can do it based on the annual. It does not make a difference what relationship you wanna look at, as long as you're consistent from property to property. So the way I set this one up in here was to do monthly. So, but again, you really wanted the extra work of converting everything to an annual basis, you could. You get a different factor, but in the end, you get the same answer. It's like doing 4 times 3 or 3 times 4. I still get to 12. Even 6 times 2 gets me to 12. I'm just multiplying with different numbers. So, if I have a property that's renting for $200 or $2,000 a month, a comparable property recently sold at $181 and had a market rent of $1,600. So first of all, pay attention, and for any problem, make sure you pair up the right numbers, because we're drawn to the first couple of numbers in the problem and think they go together. The 2,000 standalone in here. That's the subject one. The comparable property has the 181 and the 16. So make sure that we put them together. So with that being said, if you're thinking, well, why didn't you just fix it to begin with? Because I tried to make your problems as similar as what I could to problems I came across. So I would not be doing my job if I just made everything as easy as possible. Then they throw these at you, and then you can't do them because they're not in the same order as what you went over in class. So I tried to make them as realistic as what I could. So if our value is 181, and I have a monthly income on that property of 1,600, I'm getting a factor of 113.125. It's ugly, yes, but unfortunately they don't always come out pretty. So what that means is roughly the property is worth 113 times what the people are getting each month. So that's the going factor, that's the going rate. I can take that factor of 113, 125 and apply it to the subject property that I'm looking at, and I get 226, 250, which is answer choice D. So it's just a rough estimate of value. Ideally, if you go back in the value chapter, where you do the sales comparison approach, whether we do the unit in place with a square footage approach, whether we do the cap approach with the net income and the triangle, or you do this, theoretically you come out with the same answer every time in a perfect world. But we know that doesn't happen. We know that each time we do it with a different method, we're gonna get a slightly different number. But that's the premise behind the gross term multiplier. Take your value, divide it by your monthly income, get the factor, apply the factor to your subject property. Questions on 6? Is one of your cap problems. I would highly suggest that you learn the T formula, or if you like triangles, it's now matched with the triangle formula. So T formula or triangle formula, whichever one you want to use, however it makes more sense to you. When you're doing any of the cap problems, they all revolve around whatever the capitalization rate was, whatever the value of the property was, and whatever the net income is that you're getting on the property. All three go together. Okay, so we're going to pause for a second, and we're going to go shoe shopping. Okay, I have a $100 pair of shoes that's on sale, or that are on sale for 20% off. How much do I have to pay? $80. It took you less than 5 seconds to figure that out. And what you did is the triangle formula. Okay, you actually even took it a step further. So the idea behind the triangle formula is you cover up what you're trying to find. So if they asked me to come up with the percentage, what was the discount? Could have been the question. I would cover it up. I do income divided by value. When things are on top of one another, it's a division problem. Let's say I wanted value. I paid a certain amount for it, it represented a certain percentage off what was the original cost of it. In that case, it's my income, or the part divided by the rate. if I need to come up with a part or the income or what I paid for it in my shoe example, I would cover that one up. And what's left is side by side. And typically in math, things that were side by side, we multiply. So our shoe example, 20% of $100 was 20 bucks. That was the income or the part. That's the same thing in your cap problems. Whatever your cap rate is times your value is gonna represent your income number. You guys even took it a step further because beyond coming up with the part of the $20, 20% times 100, you even subtracted it from 100 and said, no, you paid 80. Because I didn't ask you, what did you save? I said, what did you pay? So the idea, again, behind that is things that you do on a daily basis, not that we shoe shop on a daily basis, but things that you are comfortable with and familiar with, they just make sense to you. You're doing the same math, in some of these problems anyway, than what we do every day. It's just using the terminology from the real estate book along with what we do on a daily basis. So your percentage here in the corner multiplied to your value will get you to your income. Now, with that being said, lots of times on these cap problems, you have to work with the income number. If you notice on 7, you have no income number. So that's a problem because we have to have it in some capacity. So it says an appraiser valued the retail store or a retail store building at $456 using a 9% cap rate. Using the cap approach, calculate the approximate value if we had used a 14% rate. So when you're given 2 rates and no value, the extra rate is not a distractor. You needed to figure out the problem. So ultimately they want to know about value. So if I ultimately need to know about value, I'm going to cover it up. That means I have to do income divided by rate. No way around it. I have to. Well, then that presents a problem. I don't have an income, but I got 2 rates. Okay, so then I have to back up a step further. I have to have income. I have to. Okay, well, let's see, what do I need for income? I need a rate and a value. So again, finding the matching components in the problem, you do have a rate and value that went together. So that will allow you to generate your income to then put back into the problem to get to value. So starting by finding the income, it's going to be equivalent to our rate of the 9% multiplied to the 456. So another side note, if you were doing the decimal on a single digit percent, that's 1, that's 2, it is 0.09. This 0 is significant, the first one's a placeholder, it's not. But if you are going to do the decimal, don't forget that 0. Your amount of income then is $41,040. Now I can apply it with the new rate, income and rate, because I'm going to cover up value. Says that I can find that value by doing the income at $41,040 divided by the 14% cap rate. Again, 2 decimal places over. And when you divide that, you get 293,143, which is choice A. Okay, so your cap problems revolve around that triangle. That can be your best friend when you're doing those problems. Now, something else that I would be remiss not to point out. When I went through the class and they showed me that triangle, I hated that thing. Didn't serve me any purpose whatsoever because I didn't know how to use it. I couldn't remember what went where. So somebody pointed out to me all of the words are alphabetical from top to bottom and left to right. So just like we read a page, we start at the top and then we go left to right. It is income and rate and value. As soon as somebody pointed that out to me, I'm like, well, darn it then. It's easy now because I have them. I know where they go. They're alphabetical. Cover up what I'm missing. Then it makes perfect sense. If they're left side by side, it's multiply. If they're left above one another, it's divide. And so that really helped me to understand and see that they were alphabetical. But without that, I hated it. I memorized the darn formulas. I had VER as my best friend, that value equaled income divided by rate, and I had to use the formula for it because I didn't understand the triangle. But I think the triangle is very helpful as long as you know what goes where and you know how to use it. Questions on 7? All right, 8. Take a wild guess. What is it?
The answer.
B.
B.
Now, I would venture to guess that most of you probably got that right. Again, because it's something you're interested in. It's your money. You want to make sure it's right. You're following the same procedure here. You have a percentage rate, whether we call it a cap rate or a simple percentage times value or times the whole is gonna give you a part or your income. So your 8% that you multiplied to the 189,925 gives you B, or 15,194. And I say simple, I don't mean easy, I just mean without a label behind it. It wasn't a cap rate, it was a percentage with not a specific label to it. 9, we're gonna treat those 4 points as if they were 4%. Same process. The percent times the whole quantity is going to give you your part. So 4%, which is 0.04, if you're doing a decimal, multiplied by the $102,000 mortgage, should give you B, $4,080. 0.04 times the 102 should give you 4,080. Now, yes ma'am. So if I take the 4 points,
So
I'm
can we
going to,
do that for all points? whether
yes
it's
ma'am,
two
so that's where I was gonna
or
go
always-
next.
Okay.
Yes, so,
That's a
here's the
percentage.
discussion with that, excellent question. If you remember in your book, in the finance chapter, it starts out talking about it takes 8 points
Mhm.
to move the discount rate 1%, right?
Mhm.
So you wanna throw that out the window anytime you're doing this calculation of the actual dollar amount. You wanna see 4 points or the word point and treat it as a percent. Okay, throw that part out the window. The only time that 8-point thing comes into play is on a content question where they might ask you, if I paid 2 points, how much did I move my interest rate? Well, you paid 2 out of 8, therefore you moved it a 1/4 point or 1/4, because 2 out of 8 simplifies to 1/4. If you paid 4 points, you moved it a 0.5% from 4 out of 8. If you paid 6 points, you moved it 0.75%, which if I'm not mistaken, that's actually the question in the book. Because 6 out of 8 simplifies to 3/4. But anytime you're calculating a dollar amount, treat those points as a percent. Questions? Yes, ma'am. So B for both 8 and 9. Alright, 10. Works off of the factor table. If you remember from the finance chapter, or maybe buyer's cost chapter, where it had the big chart and it talks about how many years you had your loan, what percentage you were paying in APR, and you can move across and figure out the factor. So this $9 per thousand that they talk about is telling you the cost of borrowing your money. That for every $1,000 that you borrow, you have to pay $9. Think about it in terms of buying a car. When we finance a car, does anybody have any idea how much every $1,000 you finance costs you? How much? A little bit higher.
About 20.
It's about 20. So when you are buying a car and you have to finance it, and they advertise these great payments that you're gonna get $250 a month in payments, you read the fine print, yeah, you pay $6,000 down. Because every $1,000 typically you put down is between $19 and $21 a month you're bringing your payment down. So you need to make sure you read the fine prints, all that stuff. So the same premise here, there's a cost to borrowing the money. The bank's not giving it to, giving it to us for free. So they're charging us $9 a thousand. So we have to figure out how many thousands I need to borrow. So in order to figure out how many thousands I need to borrow, I have to figure out my loan. So we kind of begin with the end in mind. We eventually want to figure out what's going to our first payment. Well, in order to do that, we need to figure out what that payment was, and that's based on what our factor was. And then it's how many groups of 1,000 that I had to borrow. So I have a property that's 576. I'm getting a 95% loan, so 0.95 or 95% gives me 547.2 as my loan amount. So that's how much I'm going to borrow, because I put the other 5% down. 10. I wrote 8. I'm sorry. My fault. Yes, I wrote the wrong problem number. Thank you. So number 10. Here we go. Alright, so 576 multiplied by 0.95 gives me 547.2 as my loan. I need to now divide that by 1,000. I'm dividing that by 1,000 because for every $1,000 I borrow, I have to pay $9. So I need to know how many thousands that is. So that works out to 547.2. That means if I put all the money that I needed to borrow in piles of 1,000, I would have 547 piles and that little bit left over. So I am borrowing 547 groups of $1,000. For every group I borrowed, it cost me $9. So 49.24.80. So the amount of my first monthly payment is the $49.24.80. So figure out your loan, divide by 1,000 because we're doing the factor table, multiply that by whatever the rate was they gave us. Now, this is another one of those questions where it's not good enough to get to the number, we have to know something else. So, questions on how we get to the number part first. Alright, then the other side of this is the content part, where you have to know that if I close on any day besides the first of the month, it has to skip a month, which means your answer has to be D, that it's October 1. Okay, so if you close on any date of the month aside from the first, it will skip over a month. Okay, the reason why they do that is to set up the proration, so that way every month I can have the same amortized payment.
So you said if you close on any date other than-
Besides the first, it will skip a month. So if I close from the 2nd of the month through the 31st or 30th, any other day of the month, it skips. So they like to trick you. They like to give you ones that are the 31st to the 30th. It is still going to skip a month. So I could have given you August 31st in there. The answer still would have been October 1st. It still skips a month. You just would have had less proration, but it still skips a month. The only way it would have been due September 1st is had the closing been August 1st. Okay, so we closed on our house about 5 years ago on November 6th. So our first payment wasn't due until January. So it was great because it was after Christmas, but then you got hit after Christmas with the first payment. So make sure we know that it will skip over a month. Questions on that one? Alright, for 11, this is doing the same thing that we did earlier with the PMI, I think it was that we did. This is the MIP version. But again, that process is the same. Just paying attention if they want it all the way down to monthly, which they do on this one. We start out with our loan amount. You're gonna multiply by your percentage to get to, start with sales price, I'm sorry. And you get to your loan amount. So if you write that down, and change that. So we start with our sales price, multiply by percent, gives you your loan amount. It's now the loan amount times whatever rate they gave you. Gives you the annual, in this case we're doing MIP. And then we divide it by 12 since they wanted monthly. But again, that process is the same even when we do with PMI. Sales price times percent, loan amount, take that times your rate, either stop or divide by 12 if it warrants. So 320,000 multiplied by 0.985. So again, I like the decimals. I moved it from here over 2 places. Or it's 98.5 with a percent sign. That's going to give you your 315.2 as your loan amount. From here, we need to multiply by my rate, 0.012, and that gives me 37.8240. Now, a couple of things that we have to address in this one, and they don't always set up like this, so I'm gonna stop every group and then we'll go on. Start out again with my sales price, multiply my loan to value, gives me my loan. My loan is then multiplied by whatever rate they're giving me for PMI or MIP. If all they wanted was the annual amount, I could have stopped right there. If all they continued to ask you for at that point was monthly, I would divide by 12. But this problem has something else in it. What's in this problem? What's different in this one that I didn't give you in the other one?
MIP rate. The MIP rate.
There's another rate in there. So we do have to add it back on. Notice in this one there are two rates. So when you have the problems, and they don't always set them up like this, some of them are gonna set up individually and you're just gonna get the annual amount. Other ones you're just gonna get the monthly and it's just done. If they give you these problems where the two rates are in there or both rates are in the same problem, you're gonna have to first come up with the amount of upfront PMI or UF PMI, or MIP rather, UF MIP for your upfront MIP. So if they don't spell it out and they use UF, that just means upfront. If you have to find that along with another percentage, this needs added back onto the loan amount before I can proceed. So the PMI and the one I gave you, we just were done. With the MIP problem, and again, sometimes they piggyback them and other times you're calculating them separately. So in a piggyback type problem, because you had some of these in your book in this chapter, you need to take this number and you need to add it back on to our loan amount. So our loan amount was this 315.2 number. This is the amount of upfront MIP. That needs added back on, because the whole idea behind FHA is so that you have a lower down payment. So but now you're being hit with a almost $4,000 cost right up front. So what do people do? They put it back into the loan. So before you even continue, hang on one second, I gotta tell you one more thing. So we have to put it back onto the loan before we can apply that new percentage. But even before that, there's a little tiny little caveat. And this is one that I think there was this class that we had talked about. You have to round it up to the nearest dollar.
Yes.
And if we don't round it up to the nearest dollar, and I'm sorry that book is wrong on that problem because they don't round it correctly whatsoever. But if you go on to look at some of the buyer's cost sheets and those practical parts later on in the chapter, the numbers that they're using in there, they're clearly rounding them up. It's just a typo in the example, which is a bad place to have it.
Yes, it is, cause it's putting them in a
It is.
tailspin.
It was even a worse typo than just
Yeah.
the not.
Yes, I mean, it wasn't even
Going down,
rounded
it went
down,
down
they just rounded
too
too
far.
far.
And it went, yeah.
So before we can even add it back on, this seems rounded up to the nearest dollar. So it's 37.83 exactly. So, and it does not follow traditional rounding rules. It's one of these weird little things. And if you don't pay attention, unfortunately, depending on how picky the test writers want to be, then you can get it wrong. So at this point, you have the 315.2 add on with the 30. How many? Hang on. There's only one 3 there. 37.83. That added back on gives you a total being financed at 318,983. So 318,983 total financed. So 318,983 if you can't see that. Now I can apply my rate of 0.006. It is a 0.6%. So again, if you're using a decimal, it's 1, that's 2. So it's 0.006. Once I apply that rate, I'm now getting 1913.90 as the annual, and we're still not done. So 1913.90, that's your annual. They want monthly. So I have one more step to divide that out by 12 to get 159.49, which is choice C. So there is a ton in that problem. But again, I tried not to sugarcoat things too. I tried to make them similar to what you might see. So there's a lot in that problem.
I hate that.
So how are y'all doing so far? Cause this is what, number, 11 or 12?
50%.
Okay. Oh, and I'll be honest with you, whenever I went back through this and took it a second time and was given the same test, I did not do well. So it's
I
just,
got them all right.
don't listen to her. She's
I don't
lying.
even remember, I'm sure I did not.
But you know how, she gave us the hour, she came in and taught it too, she gave us the hour and I finished it, I felt so confident, I felt like, I got them all, and I didn't, so. Anyway,
But there's a lot in that problem. And really
There's
the
a
best
whole
thing,
lot.
like she said, is just making sure you can go back and do it without the notes. I mean, I can talk, and I don't mean to treat you like my kids, it's just you're my kids. And my kids at school, it's, I explain something to them, 5 minutes later, okay, what did we just do? Huh? What are you talking about? Like the thing we just spent 30 minutes on. And it's like, and they have it at the moment. But then you take it away, and it's just, everybody's the same way. Should everybody, most people, myself included. You think you know it,
Yep.
but without that prompt. Think about songs, okay? Same thing. Think about songs you have not heard in years. Radio comes on, you're singing along to every darn word of that song. Am I wrong?
You're right.
But if you didn't hear that song playing, were you gonna remember all the words to it?
No.
But it's just something about music, yes. You hear it, and then all of a sudden you know all the words to the song. Okay, it's the same idea. See, we really have to make sure we're practicing without all the steps. Once we get the hang of it, obviously it doesn't do you any good if you don't have the steps at all. So we definitely need some background in our steps before we attempt to do it without. Okay, but again, basic premise of those problems, sales price times our loan to value, then multiply with our rate, and then we could be stopping there if it's annual, we could be dividing by 12 if they just wanted monthly and only gave me 1%, or if it's more of a complex problem, which this one is, I have to take that annual amount, add it on, and apply the new percentage. And then I could be stopping if they wanted the annual number at that point, or I could be dividing by 12 if they want monthly. Alright, 12, something a little bit friendlier. How'd we do on 12?
Hey.
Hey, yay! So I hope that you would think that that one was a little bit better than, just seeing something out of the blue that's just a bunch of fractions doesn't really mean a whole lot. So just as a quick recap, it's 1/2 times 1/4 gives you 1/8. Multiplied to 640 gives you 640 over 8, which is 80 on the first part. So again, 1/2 times 1/4 is 1/8. Multiplied to 640 gives you 640 over 8, which is 80. Second part of the problem, we're going to stop and start over. We have the 1/2 times the 1/4 times the 1/4 gives you 1/32. Multiplied to 640 gives you 640 over 32, which is 20, and added back together is the 100. So one more time, the 1/2 times 1/4 times 1/4 gives you 1 over 32 times 640 gives you 640 over 32, simplifies to 20, and then adds on with the 80 to give you 100. Questions on that one?
And all of me like that.
Would be nice. But you do have some like the straight up commission problems. Some of them are just a matter of multiplying the sales price to the commission rate or doing the points problems. You will come across some, and I'm glad that you pointed it out. So just as a side note, I try to throw in things that I remember as I'm talking. When I took the state test, I walked in and probably the first 20 or 25 questions, I had no idea. Oh, this is a state test. This isn't even a class test. I mean, the state test. I walk in, I got no clue. Seriously, no idea what I was doing. Very frustrated, very nervous. So eventually, you calm down and you come across something that you know. Then, yes, and then you go on and do what you know. They have the ability for you to check mark, literally. There's a little box, you can put a check mark so you can come back to it. That also won't let you submit it if you left it blank, so that's good. Then, as you're working on the later problems, usually there's something in there that would trigger, oh, hey, wait a minute, back on question 22, they were talking about this. And you can go back and then try to answer it. Or it could be too that you're just so hyped up about it, you go back and reread question 3 and you're like, oh, that's what they wanted. but you're not thinking that at the beginning because you're so nervous about the test. And honest to goodness, you know, I tell everybody that in the real estate class, but I sat in a training today, I wasn't even with my kids today. I sat in a training today, and somebody from the State Department who was leading our training, we talked about preparing for EOC or EOG, if you guys have high school kids, you know, coming up relatively soon, or EOG for the lower level, for like our 3 to 8th grade level. And that's what we talked about, you know, is that whole time management. Don't let one problem completely throw you. If you find you're getting stuck on it, skip it. It's not worth it. Cause you know, one problem will rattle me and I get so upset. We did a test today, all the teachers did a test, and I probably was like one of the last ones to finish. Cause I got stuck on the first problem and couldn't figure it out. And finally I'm like, oh, that's all they wanted. And I'm like, so, but same thing, so don't let it rattle you. Easier said than done, I do appreciate that. Alright, 13, on the interest proration on a monthly basis. So even though we are talking about a month, I still like to do a little calendar. So on May 1st, May 26th was my closing date, and May 31st was the end of the month. When we make our payments again, we make them, typically in book world anyway, on the first of the month. That means that we paid the interest from the month before in arrears, and then we paid the principal forward. So that's the whole reason why they push the payment to the next month, so you don't have this gap, so to say, that you have to pay. So when something happens like I close in the middle of the month, well, I haven't paid any interest for that month, because my June 1 payment would have paid all that interest for May. So now I've lived in that house for 26 days, and I haven't paid any interest. So this is a scenario where it's a backwards one. And I'm going to color in my dot, because I do now need to include that, because now I'm counting what they owe. So remember how we talked about it with seller debit this way and seller credit that way? It still works the same. I'm going back to the beginning because I haven't paid for anything yet. This could be the same thing as taxes. Taxes not paid. I have to go back to the beginning. So it's 26 days because it is the full amount up to and including the day of close. The seller was responsible for day of close, so here I have to account for it because I'm accounting for what they owe. So it's 26 days in terms of the number of days. For the amount of money, the payoff on the loan was $90,125. My rate was 0.429 or 4.29. So when I shift my decimal over, it's 0.04. So it's very close to 4%. So 4.29% is a 0.0429. Gives me the annual interest, and this is probably the longest number on the whole test. So 3866.3625. Again, keeping it out to 4 places. So that's my annual interest. Then I have to get a daily amount. Here's where 360 comes in. Now, if you notice, they even gave you 360 in the problem. They don't always do that. Sometimes they do. So if not, this is the one we have to remember that we're dealing with a loan. So it's a 0, so it's 360. Gives me a daily rate of 10.7399. Once I get my daily rate, I'm going to apply that to my 26 days. So the 1073 multiplied to the 26 gives me 279.24. And here again is another one of the problems where once we got to the number, that's great, but it wasn't good enough to answer the question. So we'll stop here and then we'll talk about the end of it.
So the daily rate you had rounded up?
No, good question. I took it out to 4 places. So I said 1073 when I was talking, but I kept it out to 4 places when I actually did the calculation. So we start at the 90,125, multiply by our rate of the 0.0429. You get this whole long number for the annual interest. Divide it by 360, should give you 10.7399 for each day. Then I apply it.
Taking it out 4 places is your friend.
Yes. And there is a neat calculator. It's a Canon. It's a tax calculator. It's like $10 at Walmart. And it's got a slide bar feature on it, a true physical slide bar. It's a tax calculator, so I can slide it, and every problem I do will round out to 4 places, if more places would have been in there. And it's very user friendly, it was allowed on the test, it doesn't program or do anything like that. And so it just has the function of that sidebar to keep you at 4 places all the time. So, and it was maybe $10, it was a Canon. And that's the one that I used for my test, because I liked that. Questions on the 279 number? Alright, from here, we had to pick out of the choices, and it should be C, because it is the accrued charge. So we talked about this over here. It would be a seller debit on that side. So debit was the fancy word for charge, and it is accrued because we haven't paid anything yet. Questions on that one? 14 is one of the qualifying problems. The qualifying problems in the practical for the finance chapter are based on the idea that a bank is only going to give you money for a loan if you meet certain specifications. So based on whatever your monthly income is, they're going to only allow you to use so much of it to pay for a house payment. So if we're bringing home $3,000 a month, and they say we're only going to allow you to expend 10% of your income, that means your house payment has to be $300 or under. If your house payment isn't $300 or under, you're not going to qualify for the loan. So if your house payment is going to be $400, well then your monthly income needs to go up to account for the appropriate 10%. Now fortunately, it's not 10%. They're going to give you ratios usually in the low 30%. So that's what they call the front end ratio. Your amount of income and your house payment cannot exceed 30-ish% of your monthly income. So let's say you meet it and you say, okay, I'm allowed to use $300 for my monthly house payment. I found a house that's gonna cost me $290, I'm good to go. But now the problem is you only have $10 left to get in that space. You have the electric bill to pay for, you have your car insurance to pay for, student loans to pay for, etc. So now they have what they call the back end ratio, because they recognize that your house payment is not the only thing you're going to be paying. So they up the rate a little bit, so you notice like the 29, 36-ish% that they gave you in there. They're gonna say, okay, well first you have to meet here. First your house payment in and of itself has to be under this percentage. Then with all your other bills, they'll let you come up to here. And in the end, you have to meet on both of them. You have to be under here, and you have to be under on the end. If you're over at the beginning, the end doesn't even matter. But even if you qualify on the under, but you don't qualify on the back end because you have too many bills, then you still aren't going to qualify. So the way that question is worded, it wants to know what is incorrect, which means unfortunately you have to work through every single answer choice. Yes. And prove then which one is the right answer by proving all of the other ones being correct mathematically or conceptually. So A says our front end ratio, or housing expense they refer to it as well, is 29%. That's your principal, interest, taxes, insurance, just stuff straight up with the loan. So in order to figure out if that's true or not, we have to take what her principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, her $1,430, and divide it by her monthly income. Notice they gave you annual, but everything we do is based for payments on a monthly basis. So before I can even figure out what that percentage is, I have to take her 59.7 and divide it by 12 to get to her monthly income. When I divide that by 12, I get 49.75 in monthly income. So now, if she's planning on expending $1,430 out of her $49.75, we can figure out what percent that's taking up. And if I round it to 2 places, I don't want to put a percent sign there, I'll get 0.29, which is equivalent to the 29% they're giving you there. So her front end ratio is 29%. Okay, think about, go back to our triangle real quick. Remember our friend back here? So, doesn't go there. Here was the rate over here, your value, your income. You just did the same thing. You took the income or the part, divided by the whole thing, and calculated your rate. Just as an FYI. So So that's A. A therefore can't be the right answer because it's a true statement. They wanna know what's false. B says that the back end ratio is 35%. No, I take that back. B says they'll qualify. We're gonna skip that one because that's gonna be the last one we do. So I'm gonna jump down to C. C is the one where it gives you your back end ratio, also called debt to income, being 35%. So this is the one where you have to take your principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, your 1430, and add on whatever other bills that they had given you. So the other two bills they give us in here are the 225 on the car loan and the 100 on the student loan. That collectively, divided by the 4975, is what is known as her back end ratio. If I add up everything on top, it comes out to 1755. Then divided by the 4975 does indeed give you 0.35, which is the 35%. So that's a true statement, which can't be the answer to the question then because they want you to know the false statement. So 1755 divide that gives me the 0.35. So then we go on to D. D we kind of already inherently got. It says that the back end debt was 1755. That is a true statement. That's the number we figured out here. So then by process of elimination, B has to be the answer to the question because it's the only one left, one, but then beyond that, it's the correct answer because it's false. Excuse me, it's false because it says that she would qualify or he would qualify if they used ratios of 30 and 34%. They met on the front one, they came in at 29, but they didn't meet on the back, they were at 35 and they needed to be at 34. So they had too many bills on the back end, so something needs paid down and then they should qualify for the loan. Now, the good thing about that problem, there really is a good thing about that problem, you at least don't have to memorize those percentages. Whatever percentages they gave you in the book or whatever problem, percentages are in this problem, they're going to give you what they want you to use. You do not need to memorize them. You need to know how to get to them, then you need to know the statement that they have to be under on both for them to qualify. Alright, questions on that part? Alright, 15, I don't think is a hard one, but it's a long one, because you have to figure out the square footage of every floor. Then you have to attribute the dollar cost for every square foot. Then you have to add everything back together. And then don't forget, then they have to throw a little twist in there to give you one more thing to think about. So this was based on one of the problems in the value chapter, where you were figuring out a possible price or value of a property based on the square footage. So the first floor was measuring 52 by 59. So just an area part. Length times width gives us 3,068 in terms of our square footage. They wanted to cost out this first floor at $73 a square foot, giving you $223,964. So the first floor of that house was worth a little over $200,000 based on the square footage of it and based on what they were costing it out at. Second floor had the same dimensions, so that's kind of irrelevant. All you really care about is the square footage because it was going to be the same. They costed it out at $58 a square foot, saying that the second floor of that property was worth a little under $200,000 at $177,944. Now, I don't know about you, but we have been looking for houses literally since the day we moved here. And in 20 some years, I've never known a builder to charge you something different for the second floor versus the first floor.
That's a big house too.
Seriously. Basement, yes. Coming from the north, we grew up with basements. We finally found a builder that would make us a house with a basement. But I've never seen them cost them out at the second floor did. So here's the trick in this problem. If you go wrong, this is most likely where you went wrong. The basement is half the size. So mentally what we want to do is take half of whatever number we see. So we wanna do half of this, and we wanna do half of that. The problem, when you half it this way and half it this way, you've now quartered your space. So ignore the dimensions, just half this, that's exactly right. Okay, because it's so easy to do. Same thing with triangles, when we were little, we're taught half times base times height. What do the kids do? Half of both those numbers. No, because in reality, if I take a triangle, it's just half of a square or a rectangle depending on my dimensions. So why not just teach them length and width like we do in a rectangle and divide it by 2? Rather than using base and height now as a new term where they're likely to try to take half of both of them. So 1534, and then the basement's costing out at 29, giving you 486, thank you. And then we add them all back together at 446, 394. So I think, once you get to the numbers, I made it A, I would be pretty confident that you're able to add them up and get to that answer. It's all just that half basement thing that tends to throw people. We're getting there, promise. Alright, 16 and 17. Intangibles and transfer tax. Now I have a little way that I have to use in my brain to remember these. So coming from the background in biology, I guess that your fingers and toes are referred to as phalanges. Okay, your fingers and toes are your phalanges. Hopefully we have 5 on each appendage. So the word intangibles in my head, for whatever reason, I see the A and G, I guess, and I think phalanges. So both of the numbers that I have to use for intangibles tax have a 5 in it. It's $1.50 for every $500. You have to know that rate. That's not given to you. You're going to have that memorized. You also need to know that's the rate that goes with intangibles and not transfer, because transfer has a different rate. So the A and G, again in intangibles, just triggers my brain, talking about songs, triggers my brain to think 5. So it's $1.50 for every $500. Whereas if you drop down to 17, and we will work them both out, but if you drop down to 17, it's transfer tax, it's T and T, 10 and 10. Both of the numbers in the rate that you have to deal with have a multiple of 10. It's 10 cents on $100. 10 cents on $100. So 0.10 on 100, or 10 cents on 100, whereas intangibles was $1.50 for every 500. So that's the only way I keep it straight in my head, is how do I know which one's which. So sales price on 16 is $390. I'm gonna multiply by my loan to value, 0.95, or 95%, gives me $370. I then, from here, have to divide by $500 because I'm going to pay $1.50 on every $500. So when I divide that out, I'm gonna get $741. And for every group, kind of like the factor table, every group I have to pay $1.50 on, I get $11.50. So $1,111.50. So it's $1.50 on every $500. So from my loan amount, which I got to from using my loan to value rate of $370, divide that by $500.
Okay, where you get this $1,000 from?
It's a rate that we have to memorize. So it's $1.50 per $500.
Per $500.
Yes, ma'am. So $1.50 per 500. And this is in, I believe it's in buyer's cost. It could be seller's cost, but I believe both of these are in buyer's cost. Then 17 is done the same way, just with the other rate. So I'm starting at $215. My loan to value here, no, I take that back, we don't even need loan to value, because it was just on sales price. So we're dividing by 100, gives me 2150, multiplied by 0.10 for 10 cents, and I'm gonna pay $215 in transfer tax.
That was 10 cents for every $100.
Yes. And so this one's on the loan amount. AMT, that's on the loan amount. This one here is on your sales price, so that's why we didn't need the percentage. So your 10 cents on $100 is on your sales price, whereas your intangibles is on your loan amount. Just for extra clarification, that's why we didn't have the percentage. Questions on those two? And remember, those are paid to the county, so it's a content question that asks you whether the transfer tax is paid to the county. Versus a transfer fee is paid to the bank. You get that question. Alright, ready for your last one? Yeah, right on schedule.
I shoot the phone.
Okay.
I said, shoot the phone.
I had one of my moms emailed me the other day, she wanted something. So I try to be really diligent, especially with the parents that are, emailing all the time. And she emailed me back, she's like, you're a rock star. I had to laugh.
I would agree with that, a lot of teachers do not respond
They don't.
promptly.
They don't, and I try to see, now having my own children, I try to see both sides of it.
Yeah.
And it's okay, what would I want as a mom? And so that definitely makes a difference. Alright, our last one. This is one that only actually will work for, never mind, it's not that one, never mind, different story. Okay, so we're doing our proration on the buyer side. So we did one earlier on the seller side, so now we're doing the buyer side on the interest proration. So this will help to explain too why we have to do the proration, again, and why we set that first payment at that next month. So here we're paying that gap. So we are starting out with 131 as our sales price. Our loan to value is going to be 0.95. Gives me a loan amount of 124,450. Then the interest rate that they have quoted me is 5.29%. So moving the decimal over, 0.0529 gives me 6,583.405. There isn't a fourth digit, so that's why it's not there. But do carry it out to 4 if they give you 4. So before I continue, because that's a lot really to swallow there, we're starting with the 131. We have to multiply by our loan to value to figure out what our loan is, multiplied by the interest rate to get to the annual interest. So again, because we're doing this proration on interest that's on a daily rate, we're gonna divide by 360 in a minute and then account for our number of days. So same process that we did with the seller's payoff on their loan, we're just doing the other side of it. So questions all up to the 65 number? We're okay getting to the 6,000 so far? Divide that by 360. Again, it's a loan that we're dealing with. Gives us a daily rate of 18,2872, kept out the 4 places. And now we have to multiply it by our number of days. So again, back to our timeline. They were closing September 9th. Here's my September 1, September 30. So when they close September 9th, content question, when's the first payment due?
February.
November 1st, right? So we're in September.
No, September.
So we jump over to November. So the idea in jumping over to November again is so that in November, as of November 1, when they make their payment, they're paying all the interest for October and principal forward for November. So there's that gap now of the day they closed through the end of September that's never getting paid for. Remember, because we pushed our payment all the way to November, which pays October's interest. So that's the reason for the rationale for the proration here. We do that so that we can have our payments again due on the 1st of the month. So, because I'm closing on the 9th, and I've not paid any interest whatsoever, I won't, I couldn't have, I haven't been in the house, they're going to be responsible for the interest from the 9th to the end of the month. Okay, they're responsible from the 9th to the end of the month. They have not paid anything. So, again, I like to write out days. They owe for the 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, and I know it's time intensive. I just write it out again just because I'm OCD if you haven't figured that out. So, I like it all written out. So, as she said, it's 22. So, for my month of September, I have 22 days. So I'm gonna add them up, again, groups of 7, and then the extra one made 22. So when I multiply all that out by 22, I'm gonna come out to 40232. So, stop here and then we'll talk about which of the two it is from there. So, I had to include the 9th again this time because I'm not counting a refund. I'm not counting what they're not responsible for, as we were with the sellers. I'm accounting for what they owe. They owe from the 9th on. That's why it's a darkened in circle. This is the one exception. Those y'all sitting there saying, what about the seller? I thought they were responsible. It's the one exception where they're both responsible. If you remember that from your book. Buyer and seller is responsible for the interest for the day of close.
They each have their own money.
They each other, so theoretically, and that was the best way, even going through the class, I never understood why. Why are they both paying? And the answer was always, oh, the bank just wants to make money, which wasn't a good answer. So somebody points out that they're not always assuming that person's loan. The one has their percent on their day for their loan, which obviously everyone's daily rate is gonna be different, because the loan was different, the payoff's different than the new loan. Okay, so when they're, especially if they're not assuming that loan, they have their new loan and the seller has their existing loan. So everybody's responsible for the day of close when it comes to interest. So questions in terms of why 22 days or why the number of 40232? So then from that part is choice B, because it is a prepaid charge. They have not actually incurred it yet. So they haven't lived in the house yet, but by the time that the payment rolled around, they would have. But at this point, they haven't. So, another thing to talk about is at the bottom of the page, let's look at there just one more second. But before you put that away, I want to talk about one more thing real quick. And I'm going to give it back to them so they can talk about what they need to for their test. And then if we have just a few minutes to do anything in the book.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if there's anything in the book, we'll hit that real quick. So questions on that one before we finish that problem. Alright, I gave you a note, again at the bottom of the paper, and I think one thing that I'm guilty of kind of around the clock with teaching, not that I'm not guilty of a lot of things, but I probably give you too much information, honestly. But again, I think that if I don't give it to you, then I feel bad if you miss something because I didn't tell you about it. So, there is a little rule, and I say little because it literally came across one problem and affected one problem on everything I had access to make you your test. So I didn't put it on your test because I didn't want it to confuse you when really it was one problem. But I do think you need to be aware anytime you are dealing with a loan amount that you have to proceed from within the calculation, whether it's PMI, MIP, interest, whatever you're doing, your loan amount needs to be rounded down to the nearest $50. It does not follow traditional rounding rules, so I gave you 2 examples. Using a sales price of $576.2 and a 95% loan, mathematically that loan comes out to $547.390 when I multiply. But if I were to proceed in that problem with whatever I'm doing with $547.390, I get it wrong. It has to drop down to the nearest $50 increment, which is either 50 or 0. So when it falls in that category of above 50, you drop it to 50. In the second example, the 425.1 multiplied by 95% gives me a loan of 403.845. So that's under the 50. So again, I'm not rounding up, I'm dropping down to the nearest $50 increment. So I only have 2 $50 increments, either at 0 or at 50. So that one's gonna drop all the way down to 403.800. If you go back and look at any one of the problems that we did tonight, you will notice that every one of them were nice and neat and either came out to something 50 or they came out to 0, 0 on the end of the loan. So I purposely kept it out of those because it literally affected one problem and all the stuff I had access to. But like I said, I didn't want to not tell you and have you come across one of those. But if it is something that you forget, it should maybe at most cost you one problem.
What causes it to be wrong?
Because the bank's gonna use the calculation with it rounded down, and when you do it in the one that I had, if you do it with the 90, then you get the answer wrong. Like, they literally have that as a choice. Why the bank does it, I don't have a good reason. I don't know if you guys know more than I do and why they do it. But, and it was a different rule, like when I went through the class 15-ish years ago, we had a different rule. If it was in this category, it went this way, and if it was this, it went that way. So it's even changed in the last 15 years since I went through. So, some minor caveat there.
It's probably one of 150.
And it really is, and that's why I don't even do it in a problem, because we talked about that, and talked about, you know, is it even worthwhile doing it in a problem or not? But it is there just as a side note, kind of like a footnote for you. Questions on anything from the test? Do you feel any better?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a lot. So I do recommend, and I'm sure they can make you another copy if you want, at some point, you know, if you want to work them again on the blank sheet, if you did write on yours, just to make sure you can walk yourself through the problem, because you'll have the notes now to go back and look at. I guess maybe we have about 10 minutes. If you have anything from the book that you want to do, anything driving you crazy, bothering you that you want me to work out in the book?
Yeah, so how do you, one of the ones that we've been seeing, and I just can't wrap my mind around it, how do you figure out, so if they say, what was that one that was 7%, and you had to figure out what the actual price was?
Oh, you had to back into it, so
Yeah.
if you have seller's net, and you want to back into the listing price?
Yes,
Okay, so there's one in the book, is that the one you're talking about?
I think so. It's
Okay.
probably the same thing that they had. So if you need, so you've got, what's a good example? So it's,
The one in the book, if I can interrupt,
sure, yes.
the one that's in the book talks about that this is the seller's net, it's like 136,000 and
Right.
change. And it said that you paid out a 7% commission,
Yep.
and there was like a fee of $1,400 or something you had to pay as well. So the idea behind that one is, and there is a formula that you can use. I am not a formula driven person unless I have to be. So this is one that if you can stop and think what's happening, and I'm just gonna make up the 136 number. So that 136 is our end result. That was our net.
Yep,
So before we ever got to that, there was a fee that had to be paid out. And let's just make it easier, and we're gonna say it was 2,000. So just for simple math here. So that means before we paid out the $2,000, we were at 138.
Yep.
That 138 now is the result of having paid out the commission.
right,
Because our commission comes off the sales price, not after any other fees get
Yep.
paid out. Because if I gotta pull out fees first, me as the agent, I'm getting less money
Yep.
because it's being paid off of a lower number.
nobody wants that.
Yeah, we're
So-
off the top.
So we're off the top, like she said. So once I add that back on and get to the 138, we're now gonna call it, although it's not the real net, we're gonna call it the amount less commission, for a lack of a better way to explain that. Okay, this number, if I had to pay, or the seller had to pay a 7% commission, this 138 number now represents 0.93 of X.
Okay,
It has to mathematically, because if I paid out 7% off the top, this is the result. So the formula is 100 minus the commission rate. But again, I don't even use that in my head. In my head, I think 138 is 93% of some number.
Yep.
So to isolate the X, the of some number, I'm gonna divide both sides by 0.93. And forgive me, I don't know off the top of my head, but you're gonna get something in the 140s, if I had to guess.
okay.
Was that the one in the book
Yep.
where I said you gotta plug each one of them in to figure it out?
I think so, yeah, and then we
that
had,
is a strategy, so just exactly what she said. You could have taken all of the choices, multiplied it by 7%, subtracted that off, then subtract off the 1400 number, whatever they gave you, and get down to then the number that was up in the problem.
okay,
So that's absolutely a strategy. But what people want to do is they want to take this number, even if they remember to add a fee back on, they want to try to do 7% of this number, and you can't. Because they're all relative. It's 7% of the higher number, which you don't have.
right.
All you know mathematically is that it's 93% of something.
And then you, to get the actual whole, it's gonna be divided by
By the
0.93.
right.
Instead of multiplying to get a percentage, you're
That's right,
dividing to
right.
get the
You're
actual
going
number.
backwards.
So 148,387.0967,
So 148,
387,
387,
0.0967. Well, so in this case, it would be just 97.97.
0. So 0.9, so we're actually at 10.
Oh, yeah,
round
10.
up to, if we wanna go to dollars and cents, after I told you to round 4 places on there. So, yeah. And so another thing with those, when you have to go in and test all of them, I think, and I didn't even pay attention to this, as someone pointed out, I taught another class last weekend. And somebody told me, well, 2 of the numbers were lower than 136 to begin with. So if you think about that, they couldn't have started at a higher number if they netted 136. You could eliminate 2 of those off the
Yeah.
top. So try to watch things like that. There's one in there about how many days did they keep out the loan. And if they gave you $496 in interest, I remember some of these. And they wondered how long you kept it. Well, the annual amount of interest was like $1,500. Even if you do a rough estimate, 4 out of 1,500 or 4 out of 1,600 is about a quarter of a year. Okay, so a quarter of a year is about 3 months. You're about 90 days. Just, doing little things like that to help eliminate some of the other choices that you have. Anything else out of there? I hope you enjoyed your sum, at least somewhat with math. So, yes ma'am. So, it's Carlene, and then I will give you my cell phone up here. So it's Basciano. It's pronounced as if it were SHAW in the middle. And you are welcome to Tucky 2. It's 67, 2004. If you have a question, and honestly I get random texts of like math questions that people will send me, just snap a picture of it and say, hey, this is so-and-so. And then I can try to work it out for you, and hopefully have the right answer for you, and then send it back to you.
Well,
And
name
so-
our exam again.
So
Next
2004, yes ma'am.
You can't come in with your phone on it.
No.
So that won't work.
But if you do have a question as you're working, you come across something that you get stumped on, feel free to drop me a text. I said I will get random texts, so I'm like, hey,
That's
this.
why she's the bar.
And so then I can try to work it out. If I'm in class, obviously it may take me a minute, but outside of class, I can work it out for you and send you a picture back. It's just easier to do it that way, and that way you have all the steps worked out.
So you have an evaluation sheet in front of you on her name is on the board, be sure to fill that out. We know that she's gonna get great reviews, cause she's good, thank you. And if you have any like tidbit information for them, about their state test, can you share? I mean, I know
Absolutely.
we kinda took ours, I think I took mine in 03, I don't know when you took yours.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So it's been a little while.
Oh my gosh.
some things have changed, but you've been in other classes too.
Yes.
Have any of the other teachers or other people said anything to you about it? Or?
The biggest thing, and we talked about this, and the biggest thing is don't panic. You know, because you're gonna come across these problems that are going to rattle you. Absolutely don't panic, and again, like I said, it's easier said than done. Make sure you answer all the questions. Don't you leave any blank. I've learned that the hard way with other tests that I've taken. Even if you have to guess, you're running down to literally 5 minutes left, put an answer down. Because at least you have a 1 in 4 chance of getting it correct, if nothing else. You don't put anything down, you're getting it wrong anyway, so why not at least guess on it? Studying for the test, my biggest recommendation, and we talked about it was so funny because I've never heard anybody else tell people this up until the training I sat in today. I'm like, I've been doing that for 15 years with especially the real estate class. Is you go through these practice problems that you guys will work and have worked, and even if you're redoing a test, I've highlighted my questions in 2 different colors. Typically we have 3 types of questions. Those you know cold, and you don't really need to do anything more with. Those you got wrong and you had no clue whatsoever, you took a wild guess. And then all those in the middle that you're like kind of iffy on, you may or may not get right, but even if you did get right, if you don't go back and look at them, you're not going to remember 2 days from now what it was you picked. So my best advice is make sure you pay attention to those questions that you know in your heart that you guessed on. Because if you give them 0 attention from the point you got them right, you may not remember what you picked the next time that it comes around again. So I did pink and yellow. I did pink for anything I missed, and as I was going along, I kind of put a dot as I was taking the test if I wasn't sure what the answer was. And then, again, all of my dot questions that I still got right, I did guess right, or correctly, I still highlighted them in yellow, because I knew that I didn't know them cold. So that's one of the biggest things. The other thing, there's something I was going to tell you about your state exam. It'll come back to me.
And y'all, she passed with a nearly perfect score.
So,
She ain't gonna tell everybody that, but we will. She's not gonna brag about it, but yeah.
and you typically will do better on the state exam. Almost everybody, there's a few exceptions, and they'll tell you too, everyone that comes back, almost everybody does better on the state. Like I did do okay on the state, but it was still like a 7-point differential between the exam in class and the state exam. All I know is until I remember now. But anyhow, on the state exam, if there are a couple of things that you are struggling with, try to come up with some little mnemonic device. Like we were talking about the South Dakota, South Carolina. When you get to the test, and I'm definitely not advocating cheating whatsoever, but if there are a couple of things like the 43,560 square feet to an acre, okay, that's 3, 4, 5, 6, just reverse your 4 and your 3. Okay, if there are things like that that you're struggling with, write them down as soon as you get in. You're getting scratch paper, write them down up in the corner. Even if they don't come up in the first 10 questions, by the time you get to question 22 or 23 and you have all this stuff in your head, are you gonna remember the number of square feet to an acre? Are you gonna remember that when we do taxes and insurance, is a seller debit on this side and a seller credit on this side? But if you walk into your test and you write down 43,560 in the corner and SDSC up in another corner, then just maybe 10, 15, 20 questions later when you hit it, it's then going to make sense to you why you wrote that down. Obviously, you can't cram that many things into short-term memory to where you're going to be able to do that with. But if there are a couple, and I'm sure that there are a couple that are just driving you crazy, I can't remember this. Do that with a couple of them. Like I said, make up little mnemonic devices. I do that when I grade papers. If it's A, C, D, then it's all cats, I don't know, dive or something, you know? Dive.
I said dive.
So,
9 times, so it's all good.
She's a dog person.
but I try to think of, things that help me, okay, all cats die, well, that type of thing, as I grade papers. But it's just things that work, so, definitely try anything like that, try to kind of scribble in the corner, and just don't stress out about it. But we talked about the same thing with all the teachers today. They had, the lady leading the training said, write down 1 to 50, however many questions you have on your test, and make sure you're starring or circling the ones that you need to go back to. Well, same idea, and I just told her, I said, I have my people people color code them with, pink and yellow markers or whatever you wanna use. I mean, like I said, you guys do have the unique advantage where you can literally check mark the box to tell yourself to go back and look at that particular question.
You're gonna be rattled your first 5 minutes,
Yeah,
okay? So,
25 minutes.
at least,
Yeah.
so.
Go to the bathroom before you go in there.
Yes.
Um,
And have a plan.
Do what?
That's one of my biggest.
Have a plan too, so this is just like more of a personal note. We had not been here very long, and so I was not really familiar with Savannah in the summertime. And we were staying overnight to take the test in the morning, we went down with some friends, but I had no idea to plan for a hotel before we got down there. And there happened to be something going on in Savannah that weekend in July. So we were literally on like our 4th hotel before we found a place to stay. So talk about stress, already built up, and then not having somewhere to stay, it was ridiculous. So if you are planning on spending the night somewhere, make sure you have a hotel reservation before you leave, so that's not something you're stressed out
One
about.
of our prior students went to Savannah the night before and got drunk. And then took his dad's hungover and passed. Wow. Maybe that'll work for you. I don't know.
Yeah,
Something to take the heads off.
Would not suggest that.
Something to take the heads off.
Okay, so we're thankful that she came, I know that y'all probably are thankful that she came.
Absolutely.
So, it was, like I said, it was much needed, and so thank her for coming and taking time away from her children. We did have a slip up on scheduling, that's why we didn't have class, was it last weekend or this weekend coming? This past weekend, and so, that was a Saturday that you got off and free, so that all kinda worked out good, so, and if y'all haven't filled this out on her, please send those up to me or hand those over. And then we're gonna talk about what we expect, from you guys on Tuesday.
Okay, while she's doing that, another like quick tidbit that pops into my head. If you are a math person, I treated the math like bonus questions, so the more of those I got right, the less of the other stuff I had to get right. So I did all the math first, and that's me because it would boost my confidence, at least I thought at the time. So that way I would do better on the rest of the problems, right? But if you're not a math person, feel free to skip it all. That's the last thing you wanna do is to upset yourself with that test. So if you are not math, skip them all. I don't mean don't do them, just skip them all temporarily and go back and do them afterwards. Cause like I said, you wanna do whatever is the least amount of stress or
You
the
don't have to put your
produce
name on them.
the least amount of stress